Good morning. I'm Elaine Chapnick, President of the Larchmont Mamaroneck Local Summit, welcoming you to our November meeting. Before we start, though, I want to let you know that our December meeting, the next meeting, featuring our County Executive George Latimer, will finally be in person once more. It will be held at the Westchester Jewish Center, located on the corner of Palmer and Rockland Avenues. And more details will go out about all this in December, but we're very excited to welcome everybody in person at our next meeting. And now for this morning's meeting, I'll turn to today's chair, Sabrina Fiddleman. Sabrina?
Good morning. Thank you, Elaine. Sorry. And thank you all for joining us. We're here today to talk about smarter ways to consume, conserve, and repurpose our food. I've worked with Claudine Hutton, the Reverend Lisa Mason, and Larry Thal to create this morning's program. We're all aware of the tremendous amount of food insecurity, both here in our community and the country. And here in this community, we have ongoing discussions on how to change that. But we talk much less about how much food goes to waste and the negative impact of that waste on the economy, the environment, food justice, and food insecurity. Broad-based solutions are in the works at the national level, but each one of us needs to learn to treat food as a precious resource and recognize how much agency we have to make change. So that will be the focus of our discussion this morning. I'd like to thank our three panelists for joining us and introduce them. They all bring broad experience and suggestions for forward actions. Catherine Carney is the Vice President of the Larchmont Mamaroneck Hunger Task Force, where she has volunteered for 15 years. She also volunteers with the local Meals on Wheels program. Lisa Chase is the founder and executive director of Victory Farms, which represents more than 200 local and community gardens. She's also co-chair of Grassroots Grocery in Larchmont and Mamaroneck and was previously the owner of the Grange Restaurant. Good morning to both of you. And Adam Kay is the co-founder and chief culinary officer of the Spare Food Company, a platform for upcycled foods and drinks crafted from overlooked ingredients. As chef and culinary director at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, Adam developed an understanding of the ways we can affect systemic change in our food system. And welcome to you too, Adam. I'd like to, on a quick housekeeping note, if you have questions during our conversation, please submit them in the chat addressed to the host and panelists, and be prepared during our Q&A to raise your hand. Larry Thal will step back in to monitor your questions. Adam, I'm going to turn to you first. You have a very strong climate perspective and view of the human cost of food waste. Can you give us a primer on the costs and the causes of food waste? How extensive is the problem?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having us here. Thanks, Sabrina, for the introduction. I'm just going to quickly throw out a few numbers, and then I'll double click on each of them. The numbers are 40, 310 billion, 13.8 million, 48 and 16. All right, what do those numbers mean? Well, 40 is the percent of the food that is produced and grown in this country that is not eaten by people. All right, 40%. That equates to $310 billion annually of wasted food. What does that mean in human terms and in something a little bit more relatable? That means that's the equivalent of going to your local supermarket, I don't know, Trader Joe's or DeChico's or Stop and Shop, buying 5 bags of groceries and tossing 2 of the bags in the dumpster on your way to the car. All right, that's the 40% right there. 13.8 million, that is the number of households in this country that experience food insecurity annually. That's a pre-COVID number. It's probably a little higher. And just to bring it home a little closer, in Westchester pre-COVID, and I'm sure that Catherine and Lisa might even be able to talk to this a little bit more than I can, that's about 75.4 thousand people here in Westchester County alone. 48 is the total percent of food that's wasted in households. Of that 40% number, 48% of that is wasted in households. And 16 is the percent of greenhouse gases that are contributed to the atmosphere through the wasting of food. So as you can see, it's a pretty massive problem. The scope of it is hard to wrap your mind around. And the causes for it are it's a very modern problem. This is very much a post-World War II problem that we're finding ourselves in, and that food waste is really occurring across the entire spectrum of our food system, from production, from farming fields, all the way to our households, restaurants, supermarkets, etc. What I'll talk a little bit more about a little later on, though, is as individuals, we have massive agency to actually be able to create some kind of change here. And I'll say that as a chef, because ultimately we're talking about food and we all have to eat. And those of us who are fortunate enough, and that is a big qualifier, those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to make our food choices on a daily basis actually are empowered and have the ability to really move the needle on this issue.
Can you share with us a little bit? Well, you know what? Let me come back to you on my question to you, which is more on a household level and a personal level.
Sure.
I think if you don't mind, I'd like to turn to Catherine and Lisa for a moment, because in my understanding and in my view, and probably my view is a more typical one, the agencies in this community that are addressing this are actually the agencies that also address food insecurity. And they seem to be doing the best job at that right now in our community. And so I'd like to turn to Catherine, and I'd like to ask you what the food pantry is doing, because I know you're doing quite a lot.
So we have several initiatives at the food pantry that help alleviate food waste. One of them is our fresh market. It's one of our Saturday distributions. We distribute fresh fruits and vegetables that have been rescued from Hunts Point Market in the Bronx. This is produce that otherwise would have been thrown away. They might be a few days old, but they're still in good shape and still good to hand out to our clients. Another program that we're involved in is our mobile food pantry. It's also a Saturday distribution. We recover food, Feeding Westchester recovers food from local retailers, grocery stores, big box stores, food manufacturers, food that stores can no longer sell, but still meets the safety guidelines. It's things like dairy, meats, canned and dry goods, bread, produce, things like that. Just as a note, Feeding Westchester, we're a partner agency of theirs. They recover about 3 to 3.5 million pounds of food each year through their initiatives, and we participate in some of them. We also have local partners who bring us days-old food, like Mercurio's in Mamaroneck, Bolaria, Brazilian Bakery, Sophia, Bagels by Sophia in Larchmont. They bring us the food or we go and pick it up. Our clients love it, and it's a great partnership for us. It also rescues food that would, otherwise be thrown away. We also have implemented a returns table at our food distributions. So when we realized that some clients might throw away things in the bags of food that we give them that they might not like, so they can drop it off at the returns table, and invariably another client will come behind them, pick it up. So it's sort of like a little trading post, and it's a great way to have everybody keep the food that we're giving them and not throw anything away. Sometimes we get produce that might not be good enough to give out to our clients. It's already been spoiled some. So we donate those leftover perishables to local partners like Meals on Main in Port Chester, Don Bosco in Port Chester, Hope Food Pantry in New Rochelle, because they might have a distribution the very next day, and we would not be able to hold it for a week. We also compost. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes we receive fruits and vegetables that are damaged and we can't give them to our clients. So our president has bought lots of composting buckets with tight lids, and he's been working with the village of Mamaroneck to try to set up some kind of pickup of the composting. It's a little tricky because we don't always know if we're going to have any or how much, but in the meantime, we have volunteers who will drop it off at the sanitation facilities in Larchmont or Mamaroneck.
Thank you. So as I suspected, the food pantry is doing quite a lot in this area. Can we swing back for a moment to Hunts Point? You talked about the partnership that Feeding Westchester has with Hunts Point. Before we actually opened up our meeting this morning, we talked a little bit among the panelists about Hunts Point and the volume of food that passes through. Adam mentioned that. Can either of you, Lisa or Adam, speak to the other things that happens at Hunts Point to try to ensure that there's less waste than not doing it?
Adam probably knows more, but I was just there Friday, so I'll tell you what I saw.
go for
Yeah.
it.
And so I toured Hunts Point for the first time with Grassroots Grocery, where I'm volunteering, and Grassroots Grocery is involved in food rescue in the city, and now is trying to I think will establish a community refrigerator in the village of Mamaroneck. So he's leased a 20-foot truck, refrigerated truck, and 4 days a week he goes. His name's Dan Zouderer. He grew up in Mamaroneck, and he goes to Hunts Point Market and recovers 13,000 pounds of produce each time he goes, which, as Adam would tell you, is just a tiny, and Catherine would say, tiny drop in the bucket. But he's so at Hunts Point, there are hundreds of vendors, and there are giant semi trucks, refrigerated trucks, which are powered by diesel, and they're spewing tons of fumes. The Bronx has, I think, the highest asthma rate in the country, and you go to Hunts Point and you can sort of see why. So there's a lot of inefficiency there. Tons of food. Adam might know how much is thrown out. But when we were there, there's a new organization at Hunts Point called Feeding Access. And they are a hub that is making relationships with all the vendors at Hunts Point and trying to help distribute produce to organizations like Grassroots Grocery, which are more hyper local. Feeding Westchester, City Harvest have established relationships there. Feeding America have established relationships at the market. And they are trying to identify who's got what, how old it is, how long it'll hold, and get it into the hands of many organizations that want to rescue food and get it into the hands of people very quickly.
Thank you. It seems like we need a lot of data to make this happen appropriately, that this is sort of going to be a data-driven rescue operation. But once again, as Adam has said, we really have quite a tremendous amount of agency to make changes. And I think that's hopeful. Can you talk a little bit, Lisa, more about the Grassroots Grocery and its appearance in the community?
Yeah. I'm a co-chair with Alicia Conte and Michelle Swan of the Mamaroneck Refrigerator Initiative. Grassroots Grocery was started by Dan Zouderer, who went to Murray, went to Homix, went to MHS, and became a school teacher in New York City, and realized that kids in his classes were coming to school hungry, and in particular, we're living in communities that are food deserts where produce was prohibitively expensive. He told us recently that, if you go to, say, DeCicco's and you buy a bag of romaine lettuce that's $4.95, that same bag in one of the neighborhoods he serves in the Bronx was $12.95. So people aren't buying produce. He started a model of putting community fridges on the streets of the Bronx. This is not new, but it was new to the neighborhood he was in, Mott Haven. He would get somebody to donate refrigerator from their home. They'd build a shed around it, paint it beautiful colors and flowers, and people would. He has a giant network, about 500 volunteers, I believe, who make food, rescue food, deliver food to these refrigerators, and people in the community take care of them, keep them clean, keep them safe. And he then expanded to food rescue, which I alluded to earlier. He rented a truck and began rescuing food initially once a week. And there's a big Saturday, he calls it a produce party in the Bronx, in a church parking lot in the Bronx. 40, 50 volunteers show up. It's quite an operation. There's music playing, Dan's on a megaphone. We sort the produce, we put it on pallets. He's registered, I think there were 30 drivers last weekend. People show up, the volunteers load the pallets in their cars. They get a text on their phone that says, you're taking it to this organization and this block. Here's the phone number, call the person, tell them you're coming. You arrive at the place, people come out, they help you unload the car, you go off. The food gets into the hands of local organizations immediately. He grew up here. He knew there was food insecurity in Mamaroneck and Larchmont, and he wanted to start what would be the first suburban fridge. So last summer, he had an event which drew, I think, 100 or more people to talk about establishing the first fridge in Mamaroneck. And it appears that we will be able to get the first one going sometime in the next couple of months in the village of Mamaroneck. There's a little park adjacent to St. Thomas, the police department, and Washingtonville Housing Alliance. And so we recently got we're working with a local architect named Liam Winters, who's designing the refrigerator and the structure that it'll sit in. And we consulted an arborist, we consulted a surveyor. We are making this will pass the building standards of the village of Mamaroneck and the health department standards of Westchester County Health Department.
May we pop the rendering up for a moment so people can see what you're envisioning? Larry, I think you can do that just for a moment so people can see.
So we just got this yesterday, and it may not look exactly like this, but this is the idea. So it's very modern, sleek. It'll be well lit, and there'll be a community garden adjacent also that will be planted with natives and vegetables, to show the connection, obviously, between what we grow and what we waste.
Lisa, I want to mention something. This is so wonderful. I'm just asking whether this is all in development. It's all happening right now. Is there any view to how to scale, how to let other communities know about this, how to grow this? It looks like a wonderful prototype. So I'm hopeful that it can, yeah.
Yes, so that I think this is in a way, it's sort of a pilot program, right? It's the first suburban fridge, and I could list just off the top of my head 4 or 5 communities around us where the similar situations are happening, which is there are people who are food insecure in communities where there is also a lot of prosperity and people with capacity to give. And I think that one of the things I know for me, I began volunteering at the food pantry during COVID, as I think a lot of people did, and it opened my eyes to how much food insecurity there was in a community where I did not think there was food insecurity. And I am in awe of what the food pantry does. every week, 800 bags just on the Tuesday distribution alone, 800 bags of produce and food were going out to people. So there's definitely a need. There are working poor. There are retired people on fixed incomes. There are a lot of people who have incomes who, need and welcome help with food assistance. And inflation, of course, isn't helping at all.
Yep, absolutely. But yes, I agree with you on the food pantry front. They are quite an amazing organization. Can I ask you to follow up a little bit? You talked about having a garden attached to the fridge. And I know that Victory Gardens is something that you have been dedicated to for quite a while. Can you talk a little bit about the amount of produce that comes out of the Victory Gardens and where it goes?
Yeah. So Victory Farms started at during COVID. Born out of frustration. I was trying to open the Grange restaurant and couldn't get it open because of COVID. And so I reached out to 40 people I think I knew, and said, would you be interested in growing produce in a small Victory Garden style garden, 3 by 6 feet typically, and donating it? And the food pantry very graciously agreed to take our donations. So the first year, I think we donated, I think it was 300 pounds of produce. The next year we grew to 125 families and institutions, all 4 of the elementary schools, and Sheldrake Nature Center participated, plus many families. And I actually stopped counting how many pounds of produce we delivered.
Fair enough.
People dropped their produce off at the Grange restaurant, and I employed high school juniors who are in need of community service hours and incentivized, and then start doing the work and love it, to help me collect it, sort it, and we delivered it to the food pantry. When the food pantry was in Columbus Park, they set up a table for us, and it was kind of great to watch the kids interact with the people who were coming to pick up the produce. I remember people saying, who did this? Who grew this? And, the kids could say, we did. It was sort of, neighbors growing for neighbors. It was wonderful. And when the food pantry moved to its current location, it's inside now. But what I've noticed is, it's not just us. I'm sure Catherine can talk to us. There are just so many people who are growing food and bringing produce in. So there's a giant table groaning with freshly grown produce.
It's the most beautiful display of produce that we've ever seen, and our clients love it.
Yeah, and it's so I think, when you grow your own food, you think about food differently than when you're purchasing it. At least I do, and the people in my group say the same thing. So my inspiration was wanting to do something to help alleviate hunger during COVID, and actually it was what also introduced me to Dan Zouderer, because there was a time when I collected produce, and I think it was one of those very rare times a year when the food pantry is closed, and so somebody there said, try this guy, maybe he'll take your food, and he did. So that began that relationship. So everything sort of connects.
And what it does is it prevents us from having to truck food in, and as you said, all that exhaust and waste, and it's just sort of puts a chink in the chain, which is what we need to do more and more and more, I think. Adam, I know you've been involved both with the grassroots grocery and the food pantry. You've also done quite a lot of work in the community, in the schools, and through the Center for Continuing Ed and the Love Your Food Project. Can you share your thoughts on those, and can you bring us sort of into people's homes? You said that nearly half of the waste that happens with food happens in homes and retail establishments. Can you give us some best practices on how we can in our own lives make things better, do better?
Sure. I'll answer your first question first. The Love Your Food program. I think that's that is a tri-municipality program here in the Larchmont Mamaroneck area. I think it's a great example of the kind of awareness building that is needed. Unfortunately, this is still, for many people, this is still kind of a niche issue, sadly. I don't think food insecurity necessarily is, but just in terms of food waste as a concept, it's not something that is kind of front of mind for many people. It's not really part of the public discourse in the way that it really ought to be. When you think of the numbers that I started my comments with earlier. So anything that we can be doing to raise awareness around this issue, to prevent waste from happening before it starts, I'm going to throw my support behind entirely. The ways that I personally have gotten involved in the Love Your Food program is I've done a lot of work with the schools and actually teaching the teachers about this issue. Worked at the high school, worked at Homics, worked at MAS, educating the teachers, because I think Lisa has alluded to this. You get kids involved in this issue, and that's when you can really start making some kind of impact, especially considering that the juniors that Lisa is referring to now are the purchases of 5, 10, 15 years from now, right? And the people who are really going to be making the impact. So getting teachers involved for me was a fantastic way. I think that bringing this issue into schools has amazing potential. I tell teachers that not a single subject that you could teach that you couldn't somehow weave this issue into your curriculum. It's a math problem, it's a science problem, it's an art problem, it's a creative writing problem. You can run down the list of I think of the garden at MAS where my kids went to school. That is just rife for education of every single kind of discipline to start inculcating this idea and educating kids about this. So, that's a direct outgrowth of the Love Your Food program. Yes, I recently taught a class for the Larchmont Mamaroneck continuing ed program. Again, we need as much, as many of us out there, yelling at the top of our lungs why this issue is so important, why we should be dealing with it. We also know, and I did not mention this earlier, on the science side of things, we know, and this is making the assumption that there is a general acceptance that there is something called climate change, that we know, and this is scientifically proven. Project Drawdown, if people aren't familiar with Project Drawdown, I highly encourage you to look it up. It's an organization that is it's basically a group of about 150, 200 independent scientists who are studying the most effective ways that we can not only halt the effects of climate change, but actually draw down carbon from the atmosphere. Reducing food waste is shown to be the #1 way that we can reduce the effects of climate change and actually reverse the impacts of climate change. Because we have to remember, when we're wasting food, it's not just the food that is being wasted. It is all the inputs that go into producing that food, all the fuel, all the water, refrigerants, you name it. You can run down the list. It's not just that head of lettuce. It's not just that uneaten tub of yogurt or cottage cheese. Think of everything that it took to get to that item of food to your home. Which brings me to the home, your last part of your question. Yes, we have agency, and I feel like there's a lot of things I tell people which seem like absolute common sense in terms of reducing that. How can we chip away at that 48%? that's going on
Share
in
that
our
with us anyway, in case we don't have.
yeah, listen, again, I'm a chef. I love cooking. I cook for a living. I have for my entire professional career. Number one is cook, and learning to cook and getting a few basic recipes under your belt will help you solve a lot of your potential waste issues in your refrigerator. People say, well, what recipes? I say, if you can master probably 3 things. If you have a blender, firstly, a blender is like the ultimate weapon in the war against, waste in your kitchen. I truly believe that. Whether you're making, there's nothing that can't go in a pesto, for example. I make pestos with everything from basil, yes, to, kale, to, romaine lettuce. It can all go into a pesto. Anything that's wilting, that's going south in your fridge. Blenders are great for smoothies as well. Frittatas. I taught a frittata recipe at that Larchmont Mamaroneck continuing ed class. I've yet to find something that can't go into a basic frittata, right? It's sort of my clean out the fridge recipe. And fried rice is actually another great one as well. And then just being very intentional about shopping, sticking to a list. Again, I feel like I'm stating some very obvious common sense things, but they're things we tend to stray from. And in my house, at least one day a week, we have what's called our clean out the fridge dinner night. And it might sometimes mean more than one meal being prepared, but I feel like that's a small price to pay for kind of finding what to do with that, leftover baked potato from a couple of nights before, or, parts of roast chicken that haven't been eaten, or whatever else you might have. Cleaning out your fridge through some creative cooking is a great way to do that. And just one other quick thing I'd like to say, and this is one area where sadly I don't have enough impact, and I'm sure that there are people on this call who do, is I would also love to see, moving out of the house, local businesses. I'm so glad to hear what Catherine was talking about with places like Bolero, Mercurios. There's a lot more that needs to be done in our community, and I see it day in and day out. What's going into dumpsters. I make a very intentional effort to kind of look around the back of supermarkets, and it's heartbreaking what is still slipping through the cracks. So that's where I think the local policy really needs to start taking impact and effect. Despite the efforts of the Hunger Task Force, grassroots groceries, there's still a lot that's slipping through the cracks.
And thank you, Adam, very much. And I will segue back to Lisa in a second to talk about that. But I want to turn to Catherine first, because piggybacking on using all the food that's in your refrigerator, I know Catherine is aware of a guide that Feeding Westchester has put out that will help in that area. Can you talk a little bit about that, Catherine?
Yes. Another problem that contributes to food waste comes from labeling confusion. And what I mean by that are the labels that are on food packaging. We've all seen them, and the list is like huge. It's labels like expiration dates, sell by dates, use by dates, best by dates, packing dates. I mean, the list goes on and on. Feeding Westchester says that 20% of food waste comes from labeling confusion. What I think most people need to understand is that the vast majority of foods can be consumed after the date shown on the labels, as long as the food's handled properly. So Feeding Westchester has put out this great pamphlet. You can find it on their website, feedingwestchester.org. It's called the Food Dating Guide, and we keep it at the pantry for reference, but it explains the dating on food packaging, and also it goes into how best to store your fruits and vegetables to slow down the ripening process, just any ways that we can continue to work toward alleviating food waste. So it's a great reference. If you want a copy, go on to the Feeding Westchester website.
Larry, is it possible for us to put their address up? Do you have it? I think it's just Feeding Westchester.
Feedingwestchester.org.
.org. I'm looking through the guide
Yep.
now, shelf life after code date, 6 months, 3 years, 18 months, 2 years. So it's really true that there is a lot of confusion, and a lot of waste probably comes from people not understanding that food is still good. And I think Adam would probably tell you rely on your eyes and your nose and your taste buds.
Yeah.
To make sure. Because if it tastes good, it's probably good. I don't want to be responsible for anybody getting sick, but I think that's probably the case. And Lisa mentioned that this was sort of a post-World War II problem in our country. And I think that, something has shifted since then. My mother never wasted anything. And, now we waste a tremendous
Sabrina, I
amount.
just want to mention it's so true. And I think along with what our panelists, our experts have said, habits are so important. And we live in an age of apps now. We measure our steps, we count why shouldn't we count not just our calories, but our food habits? And, we have things that encourage us, little sounds that happen on at the end of the day, you get a little trumpet sound that says that you saved so many, pounds of food, or this week, could be once a week. But I'm sure apps are on their way. And I would encourage that in the whole education system to start early and develop those habits.
Can we talk for a moment, Lisa, about what's going on in the restaurant community in Larchmont and Mamaroneck? I know you are tied in as a member or former member.
Former member, yeah. I do know, although I wish I tried to get more information and I couldn't get it. The Okra at the high school is doing there are two groups of kids doing work with restaurants around this issue. One group is doing a survey of restaurants. I think they did 10 in Larchmont, 10 in Mamaroneck, and they're trying to see how much waste the restaurants are producing, and I'm waiting for them to send us the results of that. And one of the things that's going on, I think, in restaurants is because food costs, Adam will know about this, food costs are so high. I think restaurants have, at least it seems anecdotally, it was definitely true at the Grange, are doing a better job of managing food waste because it's just too expensive to have to throw out stuff. And not the margins in restaurants are so slim. So I think we'll learn from the survey that the restaurants are around here, particularly the smaller restaurants, are doing a good job of not throwing out a lot of food. Another group has just Mr. Liberti at the high school, who runs Okra, told me that there are 3 restaurants. Because I don't have more information, I'm not going to say the names of them, that want to participate in a pilot composting program. When I ran the Grange, I tried to compost our food waste, what they call wet waste. So, the scraps from the avocado and the onion and the potatoes and the eggs and the chicken that we were cast off as part of the cooking process. And we couldn't. Our sanitation system isn't set up to handle the volume that restaurants would deliver. There's the home composting, food composting program. But I think that when I talked to the guys over at Maxwell Avenue, they said it's too much. We can't handle it. I do think that there are 3 restaurants that are working on trying to become a pilot program for composting food waste. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Right now, that food waste is taken in big special line trucks and driven, I think, to Poughkeepsie. It's a sloppy, messy trek. It would be great if there were a composting facility in Westchester that could handle food waste on that scale. I know there have been I've heard over the years that there were plans and ideas to try to get one going. I don't know, do either of you guys, Catherine or Adam, know about that?
I feel like there's an anaerobic plant that's a private-public partnership in the county, but
Yeah.
again.
So I think that restaurant, when you run a restaurant, and Adam certainly knows this better than I do, you're very aware of how much you're throwing out, in part because you pay for what you throw out. So, and I was astonished at the waste that we generated weekly. It's part of the business, and I think that if the town of Mamaroneck could find a way to compost food waste, commercial food waste, I think that would be amazing.
Could I just add one quick thing to that, and at the risk of sounding a little controversial here, I will support composting till the end of time. It is absolutely essential. I think we should all be doing it. I think what you just said, though, Lisa, is absolutely right. There is way too much food going into compost, and we need to be thinking more proactively upstream to really be preventing waste before it even gets to that point. If you look at the EPA's food recovery hierarchy that they published, I don't know, it was the mid-2010s at some point. It's now just been reconfigured. It used to be an inverted triangle with the apex at the bottom being landfill, which is the absolute last resort. Composting was only one step above landfill. There's a lot of things that we need to be doing before we even get to that point. And you're right, composting facilities are few and far between. They are overtaxed, and there's too much that's going into compost that is either that could be fed to people, and finding ways to prevent that, I think, is critical. Again, working at a place like Blue Hill at Stone Barns on a farm, I helped develop one of the most incredible composting systems. We had animals that we could send product to, and it was not a perfect system. And you can feel very good about composting, and we all should. But I would hate for that, especially at a enterprise level. I would hate for that to become an escape valve for some of the more creative work upstream that people like Dan Zauder at Grassroots are doing, or supermarkets who are figuring out ways to take produce that might be going south and preparing it in a way that it could then go into their hot bars or prepared food section. I think that's where the real innovation needs to start happening. Again, maybe a little controversial out there, but happy to discuss this more at another point.
I hope it's not controversial. Can I ask each of you for one piece of advice to people listening in today to participate in the solution? What's one thing each one of us can do right away?
I think to learn as much as you can about the food waste problem in this country. I think that each of us, with our organizations, but also at home, to, like Adam was saying, clean out your refrigerator, cook those things that you would think about throwing away. That's a whole meal. Think about ways that you can alleviate food waste in your own home, but also your community. It's a huge problem, and we have a lot of people that are hungry in this country. So that would be my thoughts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think just education. People need to, we need to bring this to the forefront of everyone's, consciousness. This needs to become more of a part of our public discourse. Again, what I said earlier is cook. I know it's not always easy for everyone, not always something that we have time to do, but we all have to eat, and that's the agency I was talking about earlier. Is that we get to actually there's a very actionable way that we can actually make a dent in this, and it's simple, but it's effective.
Sabrina, we actually have a question, but let Lisa, you go first.
Oh no, it's okay. I want to hear Marlene's question.
Oh, you do? Okay. So let me get Marlene. Marlene, can you you know,
Okay,
unmute yourself?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I have two things. One is a very practical thing I want to just mention. I get a weekly delivery from Fresh Direct. I take those bags and I bring those to the food pantry, which needs them to give food to their clients. So I encourage everybody to take those kind of bags to food pantry because they can use them.
We
And the
sure
other
can.
thing
We
Catherine,
sure
right?
can. Thank you.
And the other thing I want to talk about is I agree with Adam, is we have to try to do everything to not have so much waste. But those of us who were lucky to have our things picked up by our compostables picked up by Okra, they have now stopped doing that because they're about to present their study and they want us to all encourage the municipalities to do something. We have to figure out a way for our 3 municipalities, because all the other waste that they pick up, the garbage, they wouldn't have if they had a decent food recycling. And there's so many people who would like that. So there needs to be a way that we figure that out. And I know that the people at Maxwell don't particularly want it, but Sabrina, you're there to help us figure this out.
I hear you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. I wonder, is there any relation between the demise of the cooking classes in the schools and some of our problems now with how to cook at home? You think there's any connection with that?
There might be. I have a feeling that it's probably a combination of many different things. The ease of, Larry was talking about all the apps that we have. We can get food from anywhere at any time. We don't need to cook. And we have too many options. And, there are entire industries built around that, that, have either kind of circumvented the need to cook or have made cooking so easy where you don't really have to think too much about what you're doing or the impacts of that. So, yes, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. I just think education generally, whether it's cooking education or education about the environmental or the societal impact of this, I think it's all connected.
Sabrina, can we segue to the questions, or are you? Can we go that?
Yes, sure. Go right ahead, please.
Okay, good. So Anne Chodosh has her hand up, so you can unmute yourself, Anne.
Okay, first off, your chat was disabled, so I couldn't put this in the chat. But could you please repeat where the food dating labels pamphlet is? Because I thought it was on the Feeding Westchester site and I couldn't find it.
I'm not exactly sure where I found it on the site.
I think you have to scroll down quite a bit. But if you scroll, Catherine, after we spoke, I went and I found it, but it takes, and you have to scroll down quite a bit to get to it.
From the front page?
Yes, just keep scrolling down.
Okay.
And we put a more direct link, but I think Feeding Westchester makes you give them your name and email address in order to get it. So they don't enable us to put a more direct link.
Okay. We had a question about that I'll address to all the panelists. Does portion size play into any of the planning, and how so? So when meals are delivered from the Hunger Task Force or in any of these organizations, is it more, does waste occur even from our own organization? What do we use as portion? Do we use the ADA, the RDA, required daily allowance? What are we using? And so just a question about portion size. Any of you?
We pack bags of food, so we don't prepare meals, but we give people cereal and oats and rice and pasta and canned goods and frozen meats and cheeses, a whole array of foods. They're meant to be for a family of one bag is meant to be for a family of 4 for about 3 or 4 days worth. So it doesn't it's not for an entire week. We have guidelines from Feeding Westchester as to, the nutritional guidelines that we follow and pack accordingly.
I know we're jumping around, but can I ask Lisa, there is an app actually that allows individuals to buy restaurants' leftovers inexpensively.
Yeah, too good to go. Too good to go. It's a great app. We used it at the Grange. I think a lot of restaurants are using it now in order to. So Too Good to Go signs up restaurants and who have food to donate, and the restaurant can choose which days and how many meals they want to donate within a certain price range. If I remember correctly, the customer pays half the cost of what the food would be full price. So on Sundays at the Grange, we were closed on Monday. We would donate a number of our prepared foods, our sandwiches, our salads, which wouldn't keep through till Tuesday. And we always sold those. People were always buying them. So it's that probably is cut in a little bit to some of the Feeding Westchester, particularly the baked goods, because those have to be donated quickly. It's in terms of restaurants donating, it may be cutting in a little bit to what restaurants donate, but it is helping alleviate food waste because people who might not want to spend that much money can get the same products for significantly less money.
When you mentioned it first in our conversation, I downloaded the app, and they also send, to Adam's point about recipes and not wasting food, they do send a periodic email with tips on recipes for using things that are left over in your refrigerator. So I recommend it to people, not just for being able to buy inexpensive food, but also for the suggestions that they make. Can you talk a little bit about what liabilities might exist for restaurants in donating food and participating in programs like this?
Yes, I have learned about this recently. Yeah, so there's a good, I think it's called a Good Samaritan law that indemnifies when you're donating. If you're donating food in good faith, you're protected from liability. In the case of the refrigerator, which is a little bit different from the food pantries because it will take prepared foods, we are going to follow, in our case, Westchester County of Health regulations about food safety. And we have a committee of people, and on the committee actually is the chef from the Grange who will be overseeing this. So we'll have labels, we'll have sell by, made on the date that the product was made. To try to follow the same kinds of rules that we would follow in the restaurant business for food safety.
Sabrina, I think I might have overlooked a hand that was Janet O'Connell. If you can unmute yourself. Janet, are you here? Janet O'Connell.
Yes,
You hear me now?
yes.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for a terrific program. So just on a personal level, if we are going away and we realize that our refrigerator has got too much food, do you want our personal leftovers, or does that run into the liability issues that Lisa was just addressing?
It would totally depend, Janet. I think that Grassroots Grocery, I'll just speak because this is, one of the organizations I'm volunteering with that would do this. So they, when people produce food personally for the fridge, they're often making things. So they'll make peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or, almond, sun butter and jelly sandwiches. I think that, you have to think about it in terms of maybe you have something that you bought that is unopened and unconsumed, or, maybe you have a tray of lasagna you made and you have, half of it in a refrigerator. You could package that, but and bring it to the fridge, but we'd have to know when it was purchased. There'll be a whole system for this when the fridge gets up and running. I think when we think about what we're doing, it's more in terms of, for instance, country clubs have events, weddings, bar mitzvahs, christening parties. They will order trays of pastas that aren't consumed, and we will be able to package that sort of material and put it in the fridge. That's a little more like what we'd be able to take in the fridge.
Great. And we're all learning so much here today. Catherine Parker, you have your hand up. Please unmute.
Good morning, everyone. Since Westchester County was mentioned and the question came up about composting, I just wanted to make sure that people were aware. We do have a new shared service that we are doing with the local municipalities where they have an option of having either taking their food waste to our new composting facility, which is in Cortland, and leaving it there, or the county actually can also come to the municipality, pick up the food waste and bring it to Cortland. It's a really wonderful new shared service, and we are saving tons of waste going into the general waste stream. We also have really made a huge dent in the carbon footprint, because until we got this composting center in Cortland online, municipalities were either trucking to Ulster County or up to Connecticut. So this has made I think a really big difference. And I just wanted to mention the whole program because I think it's really successful. We have 17 municipalities in Westchester that are now participating in this, and hopefully more will be coming online soon.
Thank you, Catherine. Larry, do you have other questions? Because we're getting
No.
close to time.
Actually, no, I don't see. I missed one earlier, but no, I think that's all from the chat. Let's see.
Any last thoughts from any of our panelists? I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, and we need to talk again and again, and not just about what happens in our homes, but all the way upstream, as Adam has mentioned, where there's so much pollution and so much waste. But final thoughts from the panelists? No?
We really appreciate, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Catherine.
Just, it's a wonderful way for all of us to talk about this problem, and we really appreciate you for setting it up. It's an important issue.
Thank you.
I was going to say that I think being proximate to the issue to this issue is important. So volunteering at the food pantry, volunteering at Grassroots Grocery, participate in the school programs. I think that when you really do this work, even if you do it once a month, it opens your eyes in a way that otherwise it's an abstract issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
I would just add that I think this discussion has shown us that there's not a single solution to this issue. It's going to take a lot of people, working on a personal level, organizational level, enterprise, government level, etc. We've all got to, dig tunnels to, from these different angles to figure this out. But I think with this kind of effort and this sort of awareness building, I think we're well on our way to doing this. And I do agree, the more you insert yourself into this issue and you raise this awareness, as Lisa's saying, and your proximity to it, the easier you will find ways to actually start to make change. I'm
going to wrap this up right now. I want to thank Sabrina and Larry for hosting. I want to thank LMC, our co-hosts, for making this possible, and thank all of our wonderful speakers today who made us aware of how each one of us can get involved one way or another at home or in our community to make a dent in this problem. I also want to urge everybody to come to our next meeting in person on December 12th, where we will hear from George Latimer talking about the recent budget that they have finished up in the county and how it impacts all of us. So hope to see you next month, and thank you all again for attending, and thank you again, panelists, for this program.